I work as an emergency room nurse in a large hospital and was on night duty that night. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. It was a large hospital in the city center of my hometown, with an entire hospital district in the area. The children's hospital was right next door, and the cancer ward wasn't far away. It was a warm summer night as I parked my car in the employee parking lot. The security guard checked my badge and let me pass. I parked and walked to the entrance as I often did. As I entered the building, the solemn tranquility of the night was replaced by the frantic hustle and bustle of a large city emergency room. You would hardly think it was night in this place. The bright neon lights illuminated the busy hallway, giving one an unmistakable feeling of daytime. The next few hours passed fairly normally as far as my job is concerned. The work is generally incredibly hectic, and this night was no different. Basically, it was a typical crazy night. But things reached another level when a new patient came to the emergency room. He came in covered in blood, holding his stomach with a pained expression on his face. He appeared to be about 40 years old with long hair, a short beard, and he was wearing blue jeans. Another nurse and I went to him and helped him get to the operating room. We cut open his shirt to find the source of the bleeding. His flannel shirt was heavily soaked with blood. It should have been yellow with a checkered pattern, but it was impossible to tell. All I saw was red. As we looked at his exposed upper body, the wound was easy to see. It was a clear knife wound in the abdomen on the right side of his body. I quickly stopped the bleeding and stabilized his condition. Even though it's hard to believe, such things were quite common. The other nurse and I were well able to handle the situation. What happened next is what really frightened me. I was alone with the man. He was conscious but quiet. The knife wound was the only serious injury, but I couldn't help but notice several other injuries on his body. They weren't severe enough to require emergency treatment, but there were clear scratch marks on his arms and face. There were deep and long scratch marks in rows of 3 or 4. They were certainly made by nails. My experience is in healthcare. I am not a detective and do not have the skills to analyze the meaning of a particular type of injury, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But these scratch marks seem to be defensive. I was pretty sure of that. This man had done something to someone. My gaze slowly wandered from the man's arms to his face. He turned to me at the same time, and our eyes met. We maintained eye contact for several seconds. My mind was on high alert. Will he know that I know? I thought at that moment. He tried to grab my arm, but luckily my reflexes were faster than his, and I quickly left the room. Fortunately, the police were already there, as is customary when there's a stabbing. I told the officers what I had seen, and he assured me that they would investigate it. The man was treated by my colleague for a few more hours, and eventually the case was handed over to the police. I never found out exactly what happened between this man and the person who was involved, but my gut feeling tells me that it was not good news. All I can do is hope that the other person came out in better condition than he did. I have worked at a local gas station for a few years. It was the job I had throughout high school, and after I graduated, I kept it for a year or two, while I sorted things out. I started doing night shifts when I didn't have to go to school anymore. The pay was better, and for a few other reasons, I preferred it. The store never really got crowded at night. The gas pumps were automatic, and almost everyone paid at the pump instead of going inside, so it was pretty easy. Besides, I've always been a night person. Some would say I was a video game junkie, and they'd be right. I was already almost a night person anyway, so the decision to do night shifts was pretty easy. The gas station was located on the corner of a quieter street. There were 4 gas pumps in front, and a few garbage containers on the side. I took out the trash every morning at the end of my shift, and the garbage truck came right after I left, around 5 a.m. It was around 4 a.m., and so far everything had been quiet. I don't think I saw more than 3 or 4 customers in the 6 hours I worked. I was standing behind the counter, looking at my phone. I used this time to do some reading and check social media. The empty store was silent, except for a dull hum of the neon lights hanging from the ceiling. I looked up from my iPhone screen as a car drove into the parking lot. It was an older Pontiac, with some noticeable dents and green paint, with various rust spots. One strange thing was that the headlights were off. It was very dark, and driving without headlights was dangerous at that time. It didn't drive to any of the gas pumps, and I couldn't see where it had parked. I thought it was just someone driving around and turned back to my phone. No more than a few minutes passed when I heard a loud bang from the side of the building where the garbage containers were located. It sounded like someone had opened the lid and slammed it against the side of the building. Whoever was in that car must have been throwing something away. I thought that people do that from time to time. It's not allowed, so I usually go out and tell them that they can't use the containers. I left the counter and went through the front door. As I got closer, a shiver ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. Although I wasn't sure what it was, I decided to proceed cautiously. I nervously peeked around the corner and saw the car parked in front of the garbage area. A dark figure was standing next to the car, but I couldn't make out anything about him. It was too dark. I stood there for a few seconds and watched, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. Although I knew he must have been throwing something away, there was something creepy about this guy. I can't exactly explain what it was, but for some reason I decided not to reveal myself. I quietly returned to the store and went back to my place behind the counter. I felt a great relief when I saw the car drive past the gas pumps. There were no more customers for the rest of my shift, which only lasted an hour. As I said, I took out the trash every morning before I finished, so I collected the few garbage scraps in each of the trash cans in the store and put them in a large black garbage bag. I turned on the light switch on the other side of the building, where the garbage containers were located. As I walked to the container, I remembered the creepy guy from an hour ago. Although I hadn't thought to check what he had thrown away, I realized that I was about to find out. The bright light bulbs illuminated the green containers like spotlights, as if they were part of a strange exhibit in some kind of modern art gallery. I had to squint as I got closer. As I got to the next container, I opened the big lid, and it slammed against the side of the building, causing the familiar sound. Before I threw the garbage bag, I leaned over and looked inside. What I saw shocked me so much that I dropped the garbage bag on the floor. There was a stack of black garbage bags, and at least one of them was dripping red liquid. I had seen enough. I ran into the store and locked the door, then hid behind the counter. I frantically dialed the emergency number and told the operator everything. My hand was shaking so much that I could hardly hold the phone. The police came quickly, and indeed there was a body in the garbage container. I did my best to give a description of the guy, but like I said, it was so dark without any light that I really couldn't say what he looked like. However, I was able to give them a description of the car, and based on that, they were able to track down and arrest the guy. As of now, he is awaiting his trial for murder, and I hope to testify as a witness. I've experienced strange things during my night shifts, but that is by far the most terrifying. Although it was terrifying, I continued to work night shifts for several more months. I haven't experienced anything like that since, and I hope I never will again. My father used to work as a corrections officer at the state prison in the town we lived in. Although he used to love his job, he quit shortly after this incident, and given what happened, I don't think anyone would hold him accountable for it. He was working the night shift at the time. By and large, it was pretty relaxed. The inmates were locked in their cells during his shift. He used to tell me about some crazy things that happened during the day, the fights, riots, and anything else you can imagine. The night shift, however, was really quiet and relaxing. He used to say that once you got used to the sleep schedule, it was really the best option. My father patrolled the prison several times per shift. Sometimes he drove one of those guard trucks or monitored from one of the towers. That evening, however, his supervisor told him to check the prison chapel. There wasn't much to do, he told me. You just had to go and make sure that no one was there who wasn't supposed to be. He walked across the yard to the chapel. The large empty space gave off an eerie feeling. The bright floodlights on the prison wall cast a long shadow of his body as he walked past the empty basketball courts. He reached the main hall of the chapel, and as he did so, a feeling of nervousness overcame him. At that point, he didn't know why, so he pushed open the large oak door and stepped inside. He turned on the lights and started checking some of the small rooms in front of the building. After a few minutes, a man came out of the office in the back of the chapel. He appeared to be another guard. He was wearing the same uniform as my father. My father didn't know this guy, however. It wasn't that unusual, since sometimes the day shift guards would take on a night shift to earn extra money or to fill in for someone. Nevertheless, he was confused because his supervisor had told him to check the chapel. Why would he do that if someone was already there? My father asked the man, "Are you here to check the chapel?" "Yes, I'm taking care of it," the man replied. My father stood there confused for a few seconds, then said, "Oh, okay. I'll let the boss know." He left the chapel and returned to his supervisor's office in the main building. His supervisor looked up from his desk and said, "How did you finish so quickly? You couldn't have checked the whole area in such a short time." Another guard was there. He said he would check it. My father replied, "All right, as long as someone checked it," he said. At this point, his boss was confused. He assumed that the other guard had been sent there by someone else. If his boss didn't know, then who was this guy? 3 days later, my father was walking through the prison corridors and stopped to look at the display case. There were several awards and old photos of other guards from past times. As he was flipping through the photos, he saw something that made his heart sink. One of the pictures was a memorial to a guard who had been killed in a riot about 20 years ago. The photo showed the guard that my father had seen in the chapel that evening. He had never believed in the paranormal, but this experience changed his mind. He thought it was better not to tell his colleagues for fear of being laughed at, and soon after he left the job and changed careers. Although this was a terrifying experience for him, it is one of his favorite stories to tell. I have heard it more than a few times, and although I was unsure at first, I really believe it. I am a 27-year-old man and live with my fiancée in Berlin. Currently, I work as a teaching assistant for young people with special needs in a school not far from the Berlin National Park. I have worked in several schools and children's homes, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are often old houses or renovated villas. This story took place in 2013, when I had just started working as a caretaker in a home for young people and young adults aged 18 to 30 who suffered from autism, brain damage, and behavioral disorders. The home where I worked was quite large. It had 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a playroom, a study, and 5 bedrooms. It also had a huge garden with a garden house and an activity room overlooking the fields and forests. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and mainly had the night shift from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. My job was to make sure that all the residents were quiet at night and then to clean before the day staff took over. Normally, I was finished with all my tasks around 1 a.m. and spent the rest of the night listening to anyone who woke up, watching TV, reading my university books, or playing games on my phone. On one particular night, a young man named Marcos, a fictitious name to protect his identity, was particularly restless. He was not very tall, but he had a lot of strength. Once he got angry and threw an employee through the patio door because he had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before drinking it. He couldn't form complete sentences and communicated with quite simple words that he put together in a way that he understood. For example, he said Mark make breakfast when he wanted breakfast, or Mark go out when he wanted to go out to play. Generally, he was well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to, but he was known for his temper. Around 11 p.m., Marcos got up and went downstairs to get a drink. I stood at the door and watched him to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself. Then he went up the stairs without any problems. I stood on the bottom step and watched his door for about 15 minutes to make sure he didn't wake up any of the other residents. Once he had calmed down, I went back to my work. The room below Marcos's bedroom was a common living room with board games, a TV, a sofa, books, and the like. I was just dusting and wiping the floor when I heard something fall in the room above. I knew that Marcos was prone to outbursts of anger when he was frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on the door while preparing to open it myself with the key. When I opened the door, he looked at me. He looked quite calm, and his eyes were probably half closed, as if he was sleeping. I asked him if he was okay, and he nodded and gave me a thumbs up. He always did that when he was in a good mood and not stressed, so I left him alone and told him to be careful because I thought he had accidentally dropped something. An hour passed, and I was just in the kitchen cleaning the sink when I heard another big bang upstairs. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was empty at that time. The house was designed for 5 residents, but at that time there were only 4, and the room upstairs was empty. I went to check, but the room was empty. I stayed there for a while, and as far as I could see, everyone was sleeping. Due to their conditions, each resident had an alarm on their door that was triggered at night when someone left their room. A small receiver box would sound an alarm. The night staff carried the box with them, and it made a small noise to indicate which door had been opened. Since the alarm had not been triggered, I knew that the noise had not been caused by any of the residents. I returned to my cleaning work and didn't hear anything for the rest of the night. When I came to work the next day shortly before 10 a.m., I noticed that something was wrong. Marcos was lying at the foot of the stairs, holding his ears and humming loudly, and 2 employees were with him. After a few minutes, he was taken to the living room, and the house manager gave me an overview of what had happened in the last 4 hours. Marcos was very agitated, and kept repeating the sentence "S a small girl" when asked what was wrong. This was something that we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a film that had gotten stuck in his head and caused him to repeat the sentence. After Marcos had calmed down and lay down on the bed, the night staff left the station, and the other employees went to the staff room. I continued my shift, and finished as usual around 1 a.m. Shortly thereafter, I went upstairs to check on the other residents. When I reached the first floor, I noticed that the lights had been turned off. There were 2 small hallways leading to the rooms on both sides of the stairs. Marcos's room was on the left, and the light switch was right in front of his room. I turned the corner to flip the switch, and there was Marcos standing in the dark and in complete silence. He was standing in the corner with his eyes open as wide as possible. The night shift at the gas station was always quiet and uneventful, but that was what I liked. I was the only one working, and had the place to myself. I filled the shelves, wiped the floors, and waited for the occasional customer to come in. It was the perfect job for someone like me who enjoyed the solitude of the night, but this night was different. The weather was terrible. A heavy storm was sweeping through the area, and the power was out. I was alone in the gas station, trapped after dark. I tried to keep busy, but the silence was deafening. All I could hear was the muffled sound of the heavy rain. As the storm continued to rage, I began to hear strange noises from outside. I tried to ignore them, but they got louder and closer. I could hear something scratching at the door and knew I had to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly walked to the door. As I opened it, a gust of wind rushed in and soaked me in the rain. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could hear someone breathing heavily. I stood frozen, not knowing what to do, and then out of nowhere a figure burst into the store. I stumbled back and fell to the ground. I was sure I was going to die, but as the figure got closer, I managed to catch a glimpse of it. All I could see was a dark silhouette, but it was a man. A giant of a man. He must have been at least 6'9" tall, with wild hair and a thick beard. He was wearing a large coat, but even without it he would have been huge. I crawled behind the counter and activated the alarm. But I knew that help was minutes away, and I didn't have a minute. I searched the store for the guy, but lost sight of him. However, I could hear him, and the sound of his movements sounded close. I knew I had to find a weapon, something to defend myself. I found a baseball bat and swung it in front of me. The man laughed amusedly and lunged at me again. I swung with all my might and hit him, making a dull and sickening sound. He let out a final scream and fell motionless to the ground. I couldn't tell where I had hit him, but I didn't want to stay and find out. I ran out of that place and down the road. In less than a minute I was drenched in the rain. Suddenly I noticed the red and blue flashing lights that I had been waiting for. It seemed like an eternity had passed since I had called, but looking back I know it was probably less than 5 minutes. I went back to the store to meet the police. When I arrived, my attacker was gone. I gave the police the surveillance footage, but since there was still no power, we couldn't see it at that time. However, the police were never able to find the guy. I was lucky to get away with my life, but I know that I will never be the same again. The memory of that night will haunt me forever, and I will always be looking over my shoulder, wondering when the man will come back. I quit my job at the gas station and never returned. I have been a security guard for over a decade, and in that time I have seen strange things, but nothing could have prepared me for the night when this story happened. It was 2018, and I was working the night shift at a hotel in the city center. The work was really good at that time. I was very into science fiction books and had a lot of time to read. There was a security office at the back of the building where I spent most of my time. Apart from that, I made a few rounds through the building and the parking lots every few hours during the night. It was a typical quiet night at the hotel. I was making my rounds checking doors and windows when I heard a loud noise from the parking lot. At first, I thought it might be a car backfiring, but when the noise continued, I knew that something was wrong. It was 2:30 a.m., and the place was completely deserted. Every noise stood out like an alarm. So these loud bangs that I heard in the parking lot were very disturbing. I immediately called the police and then went to the source of the noise. As I approached the parking lot, I saw a hooded figure trying to break into a car. My heart was beating fast as I shone my flashlight on him and told him to stop. As soon as I said those words, he ran away. I chased him, panting, as I tried to keep up the pace. I just needed to hold him long enough until the police arrived. He was fast, and I was starting to lose ground when he suddenly disappeared. I stopped and pointed my flashlight in all directions, but I saw no trace of him. Just when I thought I had lost him, I heard a soft noise coming from a nearby alley. My hand reached for my weapon, a pepper spray, as I cautiously approached. I saw him. The man was hiding behind a garbage container, trying to catch his breath. I ordered him to surrender, but he refused. He lunged at me wildly, and then jumped on me. Suddenly we were rolling over the ground, fighting. I cursed myself for following this man. I should have waited for the police, I thought. The man was strong, but I managed to overpower him and hold him until the officers arrived. He turned out to be a wanted criminal with a long history of violence and theft. Some years have passed, but I still think about that night. The feeling of fear, adrenaline, and physical combat with the criminal will always be a part of me. I am grateful for the training that I received, and I know that it helped me to handle the situation as well as possible. But I also know that being a security guard means more than just making patrols and checking doors. It's about being prepared for anything, and being able to handle dangerous situations however rare they may be. When I was 20 years old, I worked at a gas station on the other side of the city where I lived. I had recently graduated from high school and took the night shift as a way to earn extra money since my main job didn't pay much. The gas station was open all night, but my shift was from 7 p.m. to midnight, which worked well since my other job ended at 5. It sounds like a tough schedule, and it was, but if I'm being honest, the work was really easy. It got even better because I got along very well with all my coworkers. The store itself was never very busy, since most people paid at the pump anyway. The night usually consisted of switching between scrolling through Instagram and joking with my coworkers, occasionally interrupted by a customer asking where the toilet was. The night shifts always had 2 workers, not because it was busy, but for safety reasons. It's always better to have someone nearby to watch your back, and my colleagues and I took this responsibility very seriously. This event took place on a Thursday evening, around 11 p.m. It was me and another guy, Alan, who was younger than me. I think he was 18 years old and still in high school. He had short red hair and a soft face. I don't think he even had to shave. He had worked there longer than I had, and there was a kind of older brother-younger brother dynamic between us. He was always asking me how to do everything, even though I was pretty sure he was smart enough to figure it out himself. It was mid-August, and although it was late at night, it was incredibly hot in the store. We often left the back door to the yard open, so that a breath of fresh air came in every time someone entered the front door. That was always a welcome relief from the summer heat. However, we were having a great time making jokes when the store was empty at night. I was just tidying up one of the shelves when I noticed 2 cars stopping in front of the store. One was a sedan with some noticeable dents on the body, and the other was a white van with tinted windows. The van drove to one of the gas pumps, and the car parked in one of the front spaces. I quickly finished what I was doing, and returned to the counter in case one of them needed to pay. At this point I wasn't sure if the 2 were together. I assumed that they probably were because very few customers came in at that time, and it was unusual for 2 vehicles to arrive at the same time. I waited a few minutes, and finally a single man entered the store. He was small, probably around 30, and thin as a stick. He was wearing a sleeveless white t-shirt and loosely fitting jeans that seemed to be at least a few sizes too big. He stared at me with a blank look as he came towards me. I saw him reach behind his back, and before I realized it, I saw the barrel of a gun. The gas station had a silent alarm that could be discreetly triggered, but it was a few steps away, and I couldn't afford to move. Alan was in the back, and I knew that he could hear whatever was happening in the store, so I said loudly, "No sir, please don't shoot. Take whatever you want." That should be enough for Alan to call the police. As I said that, the man rolled his eyes and smiled. Then he looked to the side. I turned around to look in the same direction, and saw Alan unconscious while he was being carried out of the back by a second man. He must have come in through the open back door. Then they demanded the money. I quickly opened the cash register, and emptied it into a bag, then handed it to one of them. Then I filled another bag with all the lottery tickets, and handed them over as well. The man holding Alan then told me that they would release him if I didn't call the police. After that, both men left through the front door, with one still carrying Alan, and both cars drove away. I stood there, and it felt like hours had passed, but it was probably only a few minutes. I hesitated to call the police because of what the man had said, but soon I decided that I had to call them, so I dialed 911 and reported the incident. The police arrived within minutes and checked the surveillance footage. I waited as patiently as I could under the circumstances. Not much later, one of the officers told me that they were able to recognize the license plate of one of the cars. They weren't the smartest criminals, I suppose. Later that night, I learned that both men had been caught by the police, and they took me to the station to identify them. An enormous feeling of relief washed over my whole body when I saw both guys standing in a line. I quickly chose the 2 men who weren't smart enough to hide their faces. After that, I asked one of the officers where Alan was. He looked at me with a serious expression, put his right hand on my shoulder, and then told me that they had never found Alan. I used to work every Thursday and Friday afternoon. Every week my shifts went from 6 p.m. to midnight. Although the schedule got in the way of my studies, my parents allowed it because they thought it would be good for me to get some work experience. After a couple of weeks of work, I would be alone for the last 2 hours of my shift. There was another guy who was there until 10 p.m., which was fine with me because it was usually very quiet at that time. I was standing behind the counter looking at my phone at around 11 p.m. one evening. Suddenly the door opened, and a man came in. He was tall, probably 6'3" inches, with a long dirty coat and sunglasses. He was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and also had a long beard, so I couldn't see much of his face. My first thought was that he was going to rob the store because it looked like he had made an effort to conceal his appearance. The guy slowly walked through the aisles and then stopped at the back of the store next to the coffee machine. He just stood there. He didn't buy anything and never said a word, not even looking at me. 5 minutes before closing time, he just walked back out the front door through which he had come. I was relieved when he left, but of course he scared me. Why would someone stay in a store for an hour without buying anything? I guess that technically it wasn't against any of our rules, but it was incredibly scary for me, especially since I was alone. On my next shift, I asked my colleague if he had seen anything similar since he had more experience than I did. I thought he might have seen the guy before. My colleague told me that he had never seen anyone like him. That evening when I was alone again, the same strange guy came back in and did the same thing. He came through the front door at 10:30 p.m. and then stood silently. During that time several people came in, but I guess it didn't seem that strange to them since they were only there for a minute or two. Like last time, he left a few minutes before closing time without any incidents. On my next shifts, the same situation happened again and again. I started to expect it sometimes. I tried to talk to the guy, but he never responded. He didn't even look at me. One of the evenings, the strange guy was standing on the other side of the store as usual. I can't describe how uncomfortable it was to be alone with this guy night after night. We had probably spent more than 10 hours together since I had started working. As usual, he left a few minutes before closing time. After he had gone, I went to the front door and locked it. Then I spent the next 30 minutes doing my closing routine. I emptied the trash cans and did a quick mop clean. Then I emptied the cash register and prepared it for deposit. On my way home, as I stepped out of the store, I looked outside and saw my car standing alone in the dark parking lot. It was on the opposite side beyond the gas pumps. I started walking to my car and suddenly I had the feeling of being watched. Just as that happened, someone came out of the darkness and stood in front of me, blocking my car. It was the same guy as before, the one who just stayed there in the store with me every night. As soon as I saw him, I ran back to the store and locked the door and hurried inside. Once inside, I locked the door and called my dad for help. While I was waiting, I looked out of the big glass window in the front and could see the guy still standing in the same spot where I had last seen him. He hadn't moved. After about 10 minutes, my dad's car pulled up and his headlights illuminated the guy. The guy's face was completely illuminated for a moment, and as that happened, he ran away. To this day, I have no idea where he went. That was the last time that I worked at that gas station, and since then I have refused to take night shifts at my other jobs. The people you meet are just too scary. I have no idea who that guy was or what he wanted, but in my opinion he wasn't in his right mind, and I don't know what he was capable of. This story occurred one evening when I stopped to get gas on my way home from work. I was working at a restaurant, so I was normally there until late, sometimes even after midnight. This time, it was around 11 p.m. I drove past this gas station every day on the way home from work, and I'm pretty sure that it was open 24/7. The store area of the gas station was larger than most. It was almost like a small grocery store because it had a decent selection of groceries, not just junk food and snacks like others. This place even had a small aisle with fresh produce, which is why I often picked up some things after filling my car with gas, since other places in the area were normally closed at this time. I walked through the aisles of the store with my car parked outside. I filled my basket with some essential things that I always buy: bananas, eggs, and bread. Then I strolled around for a while deciding if I wanted anything else. Eventually I came to the cashier and paid for both my gas and the items in the store. Then I walked outside through the large glass door on the front of the store. I could see that my car was parked next to one of the gas pumps. The parking lot was dark, but the bright lights from the gas pumps were like a glowing oasis. I began walking to my car, and as I got closer I saw that someone was sitting in the back seat. Normally I don't lock the doors when I get in because it's normally pretty quick, but this time I was in there longer than usual. Plus my car is pretty old, so you have to close them all manually. I know that's not smart, but those are my excuses, so take them how you will. I approached slowly to get a look at the person. It appeared to be an older woman who was covered in hair over most of her face, and the shadow from the car roof was forming a dark corner in the back seat where she was sitting, so it was hard to say much about her. My initial impression was that it was an elderly woman who had confusedly sat down in my car. I stood a few meters from the car while I thought about the situation. I considered just giving her a ride to wherever she was going. I'm always willing to help people in need, but something in me thought that that wasn't a good idea. After a minute or two, I decided to call the police. I hated involving the police in something like this, and made sure that they knew that it wasn't an emergency or anything. Also, I didn't want to press any charges. When the police arrived, I spoke to the officers for a few minutes. After that, they asked me to wait next to the building to give them some space. I couldn't see much from there, and the bodies of the two officers were blocking what little view I would have had. I could see them open the rear car door, and before I realized, they pulled the person out of the back seat and handcuffed him. I thought that was unnecessary, so I ran over and shouted at them to stop. In my mind it was just a confused elderly woman who had accidentally gotten into my car. But as I got closer I noticed that it wasn't a woman at all. It was an older man, probably 50 or 60 years old, with long gray hair and several large tattoos on his face and hands. For some reason he was wearing a hospital gown over his clothes. I stopped abruptly when I noticed that, and one of the officers shouted at me to stop where I was. I took a few steps back and continued to watch in disbelief. My heart sank as I noticed something. As they were searching the man, I saw them pull out a large hunting knife from underneath his clothes. He definitely had something planned for me, something that I didn't want to be a part of. It's very scary to think that I almost got into the car with that guy in the back. Luckily, I made the right decision and survived. This happened a little more than a month ago. I was with a couple of other guys at my friend Inyaki's house. There were 5 or 6 of us in total. I lived pretty far away, but everyone else lived in his neighborhood. I took my dad's car to get there. My friends had a few drinks, but I had to drive, so I couldn't drink anything. Around midnight we decided to call it a night, and I got in the car to say goodbye to my friends. My dad always lends me his car, but he requires me to fill it up to compensate for the consumption. That's a fair rule. I drove along one of the largest streets in my city. There were shops and restaurants on both sides, but everything was closed for the night and the street was pretty deserted. I noticed a gas station on the right and thought it was a good place to fill up. I parked at the furthest pump, and as I was filling up I saw another car at the gas station. It was the only other car besides mine. It was dark blue and had tinted windows. I didn't see anyone in it, but the headlights were on, so I assumed someone was there. As I got back into the driver's seat, I saw the car pull up to the pump next to mine. The front window was rolled down and the driver was wearing a mask so that I couldn't see his face. He didn't say anything, and neither did I. The situation was really uncomfortable. I tried to start my car and get out of there, but I was having trouble with the ignition. I looked up and saw that the car was still there waiting for me. Finally, I managed to start the car and drive off. After a few minutes, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that the car was still behind me. My first thought was to drive to the police station. That's what my mother had always told me to do in that kind of situation. I thought I still knew how to get there. But after a while I had gotten lost and the car was still following me. I felt like I was going in circles and getting lost in the middle of nowhere. I tried to stay calm, but the anxiety was overwhelming. I had reached a very rural area with agricultural fields on both sides and tall corn plants towering over the road. I felt trapped and I was all alone with this guy behind me. I slowed down and called the emergency number. The dispatcher answered and I tried to describe where I was, but all I could see was darkness. I couldn't see any landmarks or anything. The operator was trying to help me, but I could feel the frustration in his voice. I knew that I was in trouble. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a large grain silo with the name Miller painted on the side. I excitedly told the operator about it and he seemed to think that that would be enough for the police to find me. I drove for a few more minutes. At that moment, I saw a flash of light in the distance. It was a police car. I honked the horn so that they would see me. The police car got closer and the other car drove away. I was really relieved when I noticed that the police officer was getting out of his car and asking me if I was okay. I told him everything and we talked for a few minutes. He asked me if I wanted to file a report, but I declined. I just wanted to go home and forget everything. Besides, the car was already gone. I didn't know if they would find it, and if they found it, I would probably just say that nothing had happened. When I finally got home, I collapsed on the couch and tried to calm down. My heart was still pounding and I felt like I was in a trance-like state. I knew that I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, so I turned on the TV and tried to distract myself. Then I went to my room and played video games. Finally, I fell asleep as the sun was rising. Weeks later, I saw a report on the news about a man who had been assaulted and robbed at a gas station. The description of the car and the driver matched the car that had followed me, and I'm pretty sure that it was the same one. It was a cold winter evening, and I was working at the gas station in my village. The gas station was small with a few gas pumps, a small shop and a toilet. I spent most of my time in the shop serving customers and trying to keep warm. As night fell, the gas station became quieter. Occasionally a car would stop to fill up or buy a snack, but mostly I was alone, completely alone. It was only when two men came in that everything changed. One was tall and thin with pale skin and high cheekbones. The other was of average height with long gray hair and a baseball cap. Both were wearing dirty jackets and trousers, and their hair was unkempt. I tried to be polite, but was wary of them. They asked me for directions to the nearest village, and I pointed them in the right direction, thinking they would leave soon, but they kept staring at me up and down, and asking me personal questions. I tried to answer briefly, but they didn't get the hint. Eventually they bought some cigarettes and left, getting into an old worn-out car that was parked outside. I sighed with relief when they were gone, but I didn't know that my problems were far from over. After my shift ended, I went outside to wait for the bus. The night air was chilly and my breath condensed in front of me. Suddenly, the same old car with the two men at the wheel pulled up next to me. They offered me a ride, but I refused, telling them that I preferred to wait for the bus. But they kept pushing and started to make me really uncomfortable. Then I noticed a look in their eyes that gave me goosebumps. I told them that I wasn't interested, and then moved away as quickly as possible. When I was a street away, I looked around and saw that the car was still there. I also saw that the bus was quickly approaching. I ran to the nearest stop and managed to get on just in time. I knew that something wasn't right with these guys. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it to avoid causing a commotion. In the following weeks, I noticed this car circling around the gas station. They just seemed to be driving around the neighborhood, and I had no idea what they were up to. I try not to go out alone when those guys are around, and so far that seems to be working out the best. This happened not too long ago. I was on my way home from visiting relatives out of state. It was late, and I was tired, but I had to keep driving. The road lay before me like a black ribbon, and the only sound was the hum of my car's engine. I could never listen to music while I was driving. It distracted me too much. I was deep in thought when I saw a gas station up ahead. I decided to stop and buy some coffee and snacks to keep me awake. As I got out of the car, I felt a chill in the air. The gas station was small and isolated, with a blinking neon sign that read, "Open 24 hours." I entered the store and was immediately hit by the smell of gasoline and cigarettes. The store was dimly lit with only a few humming neon lights up above. A man stood behind the counter with greasy hair and a stained t-shirt. He looked up as I came in and his eyes seemed to follow me as I walked to the coffee machine. I poured myself a cup and then grabbed a bag of chips and some jerky. As I turned around to leave, the man was standing in front of me, blocking my path. "Nice car you got there," he said, looking at me leeringly. "Must have cost you a fortune." A cold sweat broke out on me. This guy was creepy and I didn't want to stay to find out what he wanted. "Yeah, it's a rental," I lied, trying to get past him, but he didn't move. He was looking at me with a hungry look in his eyes, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You know I could help you," he said, stepping closer. "I know a shortcut that'll get you home faster." This guy was really scaring me at this point. Something about him disgusted me. I hadn't even told him where I was going, so how could he know if there was a shortcut? "Sorry, I'm not interested," I said, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He reached out and grabbed my arm, pulling me towards him. I could smell the stench of his breath and felt nausea rising in my throat. "Come on, man," he hissed. "Don't be like that. Let me help you." I wrenched myself free from his grip and stepped back. I could hear him laughing behind me as I ran out of the store and jumped into my car. I sped out of that parking lot and back onto the road with squealing tires. I was almost crying, but as I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw the man from the gas station come out and get into his own car. He was following me. I tried to shake him off by taking sharp turns and weaving through traffic, but he was right behind me with his lights glowing in my mirror like the eyes of a demon. Suddenly he sped up and started tailgating me, trying to force me off the road. I could feel my car losing control and I braced myself for the impact, but somehow I managed to regain control and pull away from him. I didn't stop until I reached a small motel on the outskirts of town. I stumbled into the lobby and begged for a room. I was pretty sure I had lost him. The receptionist looked at me with suspicious eyes but eventually gave me a key and pointed me to my room. I stepped inside and collapsed on the bed. I don't remember how long I lay there staring at the ceiling before I finally fell asleep, but it was a long time. When I woke up at 6 a.m., I felt even more exhausted. I stuck my head out of the room and scanned the area for that car. It wasn't there. I breathed a sigh of relief and returned to my car to drive the rest of the way home. I never saw that car again and I never told anyone what happened until now, and I probably never will again. I worked at a gas station until my late 20s, and this is the scariest thing that happened to me there. I got the job when I was still in high school, and stuck with it because I couldn't find much else. Nights were a little better, so I always took that shift. I had worked there for years, serving customers without any significant events or disruptions. It was around 3 a.m. and the store was empty, as was typical at that time. During my shift, there was rarely more than one customer in the store at a time. It was a cold night and it was raining lightly. I looked up and saw a man approaching the door, his face obscured by a hoodie. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. He looked suspicious, and I got nervous as he came into the store. "Hey Kay," he said, glancing at me briefly. I took a quick look at his face, but not enough to describe it. I tried to stay calm and just nodded silently, and continued reading, but something about him worried me, and I couldn't help but feel that something was going to go wrong. He walked aimlessly around the store for several minutes. I watched him occasionally, nervously, that he would try something. I could see that he wasn't going to buy anything. Our store didn't have a good selection, and there was no reason why someone would take so long to make a decision. The tension continued to build for another minute or two. Then the man came to the counter. "Give me all the money from the cash register," he whispered. I was shocked and couldn't comprehend what was happening. I had never been robbed before, and the thought of someone threatening me with violence was beyond my worst nightmares. "Okay, no problem," I said shyly. I opened the cash register and gave him the money, and then as quickly as he had come in, he disappeared into the night like a ghost. I stood there frozen. I had triggered the alarm while he was still in the store, so I knew that it wouldn't be long before the police arrived. They came through the front door of the store and I was still standing there, completely terrified. I told them what had happened, and then we checked the surveillance footage. It was all there, but there wasn't a clear picture of his face. The officers were sure that they would find the guy based on what they had. The next day I learned that they had found and arrested the guy. He was still wearing the same clothes. He wasn't the smartest. I worked in a fast food restaurant, in a large shopping mall. It was open until midnight most of the time, and the last place that was open in the area. When my late shifts ended, there was always a really ominous mood in the air. The empty parking lot sent shivers down my spine. I worked there part-time while I was in college. On one particular evening, I was closing the restaurant with some other colleagues. To give some context, we were all girls, and there were 3 of us, including my manager. We turned off the outside lights and began cleaning the kitchen and the dining area. As we were just about to leave, the phone in the restaurant rang. It was an eerie sound because we had just turned off all the lights. The only source of light was a faint glow coming from the kitchen. My manager answered the call, and we all stood around her trying to hear the conversation. We heard the choppy voice of a man on the other end of the line. He said, "I see you in there," among other things, but the only thing that I could understand was "I saw." I looked at my colleagues. We were all visibly scared, but we tried to stay calm in the hope that it was just a prank call. Sometimes we got prank calls, but it wasn't common for them to come so late. It was already time for most people who usually pranked us to go to bed. My manager tried to ask the man who he was and what he wanted, but he didn't answer. When my manager hung up the phone, we heard a loud bang on the front door. We all flinched. My manager quickly ran to the front to check what was going on. I looked out of the large window and followed her. There stood a man in a flannel shirt in front of the door with his back to us. We couldn't see his face, but he looked neat and well-groomed, not like you would expect. His hair was thinning on top and he had his hands in his pockets. My manager made sure that the door was locked and told us to call the police. I dialed 911, and within minutes a police car arrived. We could see the red and blue lights in the dining area where we were waiting. While we were looking out the window, we could see the police officer walk up to the man and start talking to him. The man turned around and we could see his face for the first time. He had a serious expression and was looking directly at me. The police officer spoke to the man for a few minutes. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but it seemed like the police officer was telling him to leave. The man just walked away. Then the police officer went into the restaurant to talk to us. He asked us if we knew the man or had seen him before. We all shook our heads and said that we had no idea who he was. That's when the police officer told us something really creepy. He told me that the man had said he was Sophie's father and he was here to pick her up after work. I told him that that wasn't my father, and that I had never seen the man before. I had no idea how he even knew my name. It must have been a sick joke, I thought. After the police had left, we closed the restaurant and left. We were all really shaken up and couldn't stop talking about what had just happened. The next day, we talked to the other employees who had worked the previous late shift and none of them had seen the man or heard anything strange. It was as if the man had only appeared for us. In the following weeks we were all nervous when we were closing up. We always made sure that we checked all the locks twice and always looked outside before we left. We never saw that man again. When I think back to that night, I still get chills when I think about what would have happened if we had gone outside. I still wonder what he wanted and why he had said what he had said to the officers. I was disappointed that more wasn't done to keep him away. It made me feel uneasy for a long time, and I wished something could have been done to keep him away. I used to work as a cleaner in a local shopping center. I worked at night when the shops were all closed and the customers had gone home. It was a quiet job. Mostly I was alone, and sometimes there were a few others there. This time it was just me. I always listened to music or podcasts on my phone while I worked, otherwise the boredom would have been too much. One night I was mopping the floor of a narrow hallway that led to the bathroom. There was a nearby exit and a large glass door. I heard a knock behind me. I turned around and saw a man in a police uniform standing outside the glass door. He was looking directly at me and then said, "Let me in, it's an emergency." I hesitated for a moment. I was surprised to see anyone else here. It was 1:30 in the morning and I knew that there wouldn't be any police officers in the shopping center at that time, especially not knocking on a glass door to get in. But something about the man's urgent tone made me feel that I should at least listen. "Why do you need to get in?" I asked, my hand on the lock. "There was a break-in at the jewelry store. I need to get in and secure the scene," he replied. The jeweler's was one of the most valuable shops in the shopping center. Sure, they had a lot of expensive things, but if someone had broken in, I think I would have noticed. I had my headphones in, but it's hard to believe that I wouldn't have noticed. And I was pretty sure that the jeweler's locked all its expensive stuff away overnight. I didn't believe his story. Something wasn't right about the man's behavior. He was too friendly and eager for someone who was supposedly responding to a break-in, and there was only one officer. Normally there would be at least a couple. I didn't even see the guy's car. "I'm sorry, I can't let you in," I said, decidedly, and then reached for my phone to call the police. The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a frown. He began to hammer on the glass door demanding that I let him in, but I knew better than to open the door to a stranger in the middle of the night. While I was talking to the police dispatcher, the man finally gave up and disappeared from my sight. I told them what had happened, describing the man and his police uniform as best as I could. They assured me that they would send someone to check it out, and then I went to the main entrance to wait. It only took a few minutes for 2 police cars to arrive. One of the officers got out of his car, and as soon as I saw him I noticed that their uniform didn't match the guys that I had seen before. At that moment, I knew that I had made the right decision in refusing him. I spoke to the police for a few minutes, but they told me that there was no report of a break-in in the shopping center, further confirmation of what I already knew. The rest of the night passed without incident. I finished my shift as usual and left the shopping center at 6 a.m. While I was driving home, I thought about what that guy might have wanted. I guess he just wanted to rob the store, but what would he have done to me? It wouldn't have been good.